The order this morning, the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics, meeting number 104, pursuant to Standing Order 1083H7, study of breach of personal information involving Cambridge Analytica and Facebook. And today we welcome from our friends across the water from the United Kingdom House of Commons, Digital, Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee, Mr. Damien Collins. Welcome to Canada this morning.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be part of your inquiry.
We appreciate your time, and go ahead and we'll hear your opening comments, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought I would just set out the nature of the work we're doing in the United Kingdom at the moment. Our inquiry has a slightly different scope to yours. It's looking at the use of fake news and disinformation and the disruptive impact that has on elections and democracy. As a particular focus in our recent weeks has been over the use of data in targeting voters with particular pieces of information, the lack of transparency over that and how it's done, and in particular the legality of some of those practices, particularly if information is being held by private companies and consultancies about people's political views and is being used in campaigns that are being directed towards them. So we are conducting our inquiry as a parliamentary committee, and therefore as a consequence of that work, there's been a particular interest for us in the work of Cambridge Analytica, SCL and Aggregate IQ, particularly because of AIQ's work in the European referendum, the Brexit referendum in the UK. So we have a particular interest in that area. We're also working quite closely with the UK Information Commissioner. She is conducting an investigation into these matters, as you know, and in particular is looking at the use of data in elections, and she'll be producing a policy report on that later this month, as well as conducting what are now criminal investigations into certain individuals involved in this work. And the UK Electoral Commission is also conducting an inquiry into some of the questions around the way in which the Leave campaigns were run and whether there was coordination between them in the UK during that same referendum as well. So we have three separate inquiries going on. They overlap in places, but we'll report separately. But certainly for my committee, our main interest at the moment as part of our disinformation campaign is looking at the way data is used to target information at people on social media.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. We'll open it up for questions, starting off with Mr. Erskine Smith. 7 minutes.
Thanks very much, Mr. Collins. It's nice to see you. My first question is about AIQ. We certainly had them before us, and they were less than forthcoming. And have they agreed to testify before your committee?
They've agreed in principle that they will testify. They wanted to get back to us to confirm when they would testify after they've given evidence to your committee. We're currently in discussions with them about when they will give evidence, but I hope that will be in the next few weeks. I'm sorry, that's better. I lost the sound there for a moment.
Just curious, we typically do not swear witnesses in, although we have the powers to do so. Have you sworn witnesses in the course of your investigation and inquiry?
We haven't yet, no. I mean, similar to the Canadian House of Commons, there is a general presumption that people should tell the truth in front of parliamentary committees. It can be considered to be contempt of Parliament if you don't. We do have a separate power to swear in an oath, get people to swear an oath, which would carry a similar offence to perjury if someone was found to have lied under oath, but we've not yet used that. It's certainly not the custom in the British House of Commons to use that, but it's a power we can use.
So it's the same in our Parliament, of course. It's not our custom traditionally, but I would encourage you to consider it when you have AIQ before you. When Vickery testified before you recently, he seemed to directly contradict the testimony we heard from AIQ. Perhaps you could just give a brief rundown for our committee as to the nature of that testimony and how directly in conflict it was.
Yes, well, Chris Vickery identified on GitLab a set of files and data that had been placed there by AIQ. He has made a copy of that data set, and he's given us a copy of that. but also discuss some elements of that data and what it contained when it gave evidence to the committee. What it does seem to demonstrate, though, is a high level of coordination between AIQ, SCL, Cambridge Analytica, the ability to access and share information on files between those different companies. And also that all of the data that was being managed as part of the Brexit referendum campaign was all interchangeable and easily shared as well. And indeed, at some point, all of that information was made publicly available on the web as well. Now, of course, the question is why was it made available in that way? Was that just a mistake someone made? Chris Vickery seems to think it could have been a mistake. But of course, it could have been done so deliberately so that people they wanted to find it could find it if they knew what they were looking for. And Chris Vickery managed to find it.
Yeah. When it came to, obviously we are not seized with the issue of Brexit. Our investigation was specific to the Facebook Cambridge Analytica data scandal, but we heard testimony before us that seemed to be relevant for your purposes. We heard testimony from AIQ that there wasn't coordination between the various Brexit campaigns, and yet the evidence seemed to directly contradict their evidence or their testimony, and their testimony certainly didn't seem all that solid based on the answers we got. Is this what are the next steps for your committee in examining this, and can our committee be of assistance?
Absolutely. Firstly, I think one of the reasons I'm particularly pleased to be speaking to you today is that I think the more closely our respective committees coordinate on examining these issues, I think the more effective we will be. We have different jurisdictional powers, but common interest. Certainly, I think the evidence that you received from AIQ is certainly significant to us. I think that the fact that they said that invoices that have come from different campaign groups in the referendum campaign were paid by Vote Leave, which would suggest a degree of coordination. And certainly in terms of the management of data, there certainly seems to be coordination across different campaigns from AIQ as well. We know that the UK Information Commissioner is trying to get access to that data and information and has been frustrated in that process.
The point of cooperation, because I completely agree with you, and it's why we had been in touch before your attendance today, how important cooperation is. What specific areas of cooperation do you see, and are there witnesses that you think we should hear from that we perhaps haven't heard from? I mean, one option would, of course, be to have AIQ back after we've heard from Christopher Wiley and potential other witnesses, but maybe give us some broad strokes of how you think we could cooperate going forward.
Sure. Well, just to give you an idea of what we're looking to do next, obviously we want AIQ to come in front of us. We want Alexander Nix to come back in front of us as well. We also want Dominic Cummings to give evidence to the committee about the work of Vote Leave. And so those are sort of important future sessions for us. We also want, we're also interested in hearing from Aaron Banks and Andy Wigmore from Leave.eu as well. So I think if there are any areas there where we overlap, that's of interest. I think also key things too on jurisdictional issues. Where are AIQ servers? Where do they service data from? Are they in Canada or are they in the UK? And I know obviously the UK Information Commissioner as well. I mean, she's Canadian herself, and I know she's obviously seeking to pursue all of this in fine detail.
Well, of course, to the extent that we can continue to cooperate, and specifically the Canadian player being AIQ, that we can have them back if they refuse to cooperate with your committee going forward. Certainly, we'd be interested in doing so. My last question is just, we heard a revelation yesterday that Cambridge Analytica and SCL Elections are declaring bankruptcy, and perhaps it comes as no surprise that looking for a way out. But how does this impact your inquiry, if at all? And what steps, I guess, are you taking in the course of your investigation to deal with that aspect of new information?
Sure. Well, as far as we're concerned, it doesn't change our inquiry at all. I also discussed this morning with Elizabeth Denham, the Information Commissioner. As far as she's concerned, it doesn't make any difference to her inquiry either. She's investigating whether civil or criminal offences have been committed. She can pursue the directors of these companies, even if the companies themselves have been declared insolvent. She can still press charges, issue fines, as she would do before. And whilst there is an interest here in saying, well, if wrongdoing has occurred, people should be able to go after the wrongdoers and they should face whatever penalties they should face. But there's also, I think, a public service here as well, to be able to explain in public to people what happened, what these companies did, how they did it, and if it breached the law, how it did so. Just a quick one on your final question as well. I talked about some of the parties we're interested in seeing again that are directly involved in this particular issue. But of course, we are seeking to pursue, as I know you are doing too, Facebook as well. And of course, where a lot of these interactions are with Facebook and Facebook data, Facebook themselves are an important repository of information that's useful to us, if only we can get hold of it.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Erskine-Smith. Next up, Mr. Kent for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Collins, for hooking up with us today. Just to follow on the last question regarding the Cambridge Analytica declaration of bankruptcy and shutting down, what provisions or protections are in place to prevent the destruction of evidence into your inquiry, into the Information Commissioner's or Privacy Commissioner's inquiry?
Well, you're right to say that there is that risk, but had already received her warrant and had the power to go into Cambridge Analytica's offices and take servers and information that was relevant to her inquiry. So she holds that. I know that they, as we have done as a committee as well, have received a great deal of information and evidence directly, which we can investigate. So I think we're in quite a strong position there. But of course, both we and the Information Commissioner particularly can follow the data trail wherever it takes them. If that takes her into companies like Emma Data, which is another entity that is effectively connected to SCL and Cambridge Analytica, then she can pursue it there as well. There's no limit to where she can go following the data and the people connected with it. I think there's an interesting issue here, and this is something we discussed with Chris Vickery yesterday, is we talk about these companies as legal entities and physical companies, but actually what if they're not really that at all? What we're dealing with is a massive data, tools to process it, and people who do it. And they wear different hats and sit in different organisations, but effectively it's just one thing. And in that case, we can still go after the thing, even if the brass plates on the door have changed.
Also, following up on your suspicion of the possibility, even the probability that AIQ's files were left open for users to come in and use as they might, but still giving plausible deniability to AIQ that they were engaged in improper or even criminal activity. The AIQ testimony that we received also indicated that they received data, they didn't particularly care where that data came from, and they merely massaged it through their different programs, through Saga, through the other programs. Have you discovered this as well? I mean, do you see this as an attempted defense by saying, basically, traffic in improperly acquired or stolen property?
Yeah, well, I think this is an area of great concerns where this data has come from, and obviously with the Cambridge Analytica data breach, the data acquired through Alexander Kogan, we're looking at that directly. I think I noticed that looking at the transcript of AIQ's evidence to your committee, I think they're very careful in the words that they use, and they talk about we don't hold big data sets, we don't hold the data. Now that may be technically true if it exists in the cloud somewhere, but they have access to it. They make it say we don't own it, we don't hold it, but they may have access to it and they can use it. Certainly the techniques that are being used here seem to be the gathering of multiple data sets, some of it commercial data that can be acquired through companies like Experian, some of it data acquired from Facebook profiles, some of it voter data and other data, anything you can get your hands on. Effectively all put into the mix, and you get then very sophisticated profiling of individuals linked to then crucially linked to their Facebook profile. The ability then to target them directly through Facebook in that way, but not only that, to create a custom audience of those people and then take that upload that to Facebook, and Facebook will then find you a lookalike audience of people like them that will make your campaign even more widespread and successful. And what's clear is that once you've built these custom audience data sets and you've linked them back to Facebook, you don't actually need the original data sets anymore. So these companies can say, and maybe honestly, well, we've given back that data, or we've destroyed that data. That may be true, but the derivative of that data is something that they own and they have in perpetuity. And there's certainly nothing that Facebook can do to get that data back. And as you rightly say, there could be all sorts of data sets acquired in there. And our concern would be whether, if that data has been acquired illegally, that's a serious matter. And we as a parliamentary committee would certainly come to a view on that. But it's right that the UK authorities would seek to bring criminal charges against people who've broken the law.
Now, going back to the source of this evolving scandal, Mr. Kogan, he still denies. He says he's being scapegoated. That what he did was common practice. That Facebook has endured harvesting, improper harvesting, if you will, by any number of companies, and he says that what he did was perfectly legal and within the terms of Facebook service. Now, that's obviously one of many contradictions, denials, deflections, mistruths, flat-out lies that we've seen through the testimony to both of our committees. But is there an element of truth in what Mr. Professor Kogan says, is that he may well be only a very small part of a much broader misuse of harvested social media data, whether from Facebook or anywhere else?
I think that's right. Sandy Parakillis gave evidence to our committee a few weeks ago. He used to work at Facebook and had oversight of their relationships with developers and the way they use data. His concern was that abuse of data was widespread. Large amounts of data were being taken from the platform by developers. There was no real scrutiny by Facebook of what they did with it and how they did it. My contention with the Alexander Kogan data would be, I think Facebook would never have known about it if it hadn't been for a newspaper article in the Guardian in the UK, which exposed it, and they then followed up on that once they've been told. But I don't think they have any monitoring or auditing of what happens to data acquired by developers. There's then the question. Now, Kogan is right to say, well, on the terms and conditions for using the app he created, it says on those terms and conditions, that he may well give that data to other people. So the question then is, why didn't Facebook spot that at the time? Why did they approve it and let him do this? But clearly, Dr. Kogan would have known and should have known that to do what he did was a breach of Facebook's rules. I think there's then a separate question about the existing UK data protection law at the time he did it, which has got quite strong provisions in place to stop people using and holding political data about people and to gather data to use in political campaigns. And I think he should have known there that there was certainly serious legal questions about what he was doing.
Well, and this is a very short question. My time is almost out. What is the timeline for your study, your investigation, and do you expect to have any firm, hard conclusions at that outcome? And just supplementary to that, the timeline of the Privacy Commissioner's investigation.
Sure. So the parliamentary inquiry, we're aiming to report before the summer recess in the UK. So that is around about the 20th of July. That's what we're looking to do. We'll be holding oral evidence hearings into June, but then we'll look to move to bring our sort of findings to a conclusion at that point and produce our first report. We certainly will be looking to make concrete conclusions based on what we think happened and based on the evidence we've received, and also, as is normal for select committees in the House of Commons, policy recommendations to the UK government. Actually, one of the issues that we have championed, the government have already given ground on, and that is on additional powers for the Information Commissioner, for her to be able to have no notice periods before arriving to take and seize data. So we don't have a repeat of what was a farcical situation where it took her 5 days to get a warrant to go into Cambridge Analytica. So she will have substantially enhanced powers, which will help the conclusion of this investigation and future ones too. In terms of her work, I believe that she's looking to produce a policy report looking at the general issues of data use in elections, and she's she's aiming to produce that report by the end of this month. I certainly believe it's her hope that she would have concluded the initial investigations into criminal and civil offences by July. But I know that she's receiving a lot of new information, and therefore it's possible that may take longer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kent. Next up for 7 minutes, Mr. Angus.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. It's a pleasure to have you with our committee today. In my 14 years in Parliament, I've never seen a situation where one of our committees is actually speaking to a committee in the UK or in any other jurisdiction, but maybe it is a reflection of the nature of the big data beast that all of us are dealing with, which is very much cross-border and almost beyond the they seem to think they're beyond the jurisdictions of domestic law. So you could probably help us get a better sense of some of the questions that we were left struggling with after Aggregate IQ came before us, because they are listed as SCL Canada. Zach Massingham is identified as having the phone for SCL Canada. He says there is no connection between Aggregate IQ and SCL. Do you think that that's a credible response?
Well, the evidence we've received contradicts that. We were told by Chris Wiley, by Brittany Kaiser, that as far as they were concerned, that's what it was. It was SCL Canada, and indeed there are documents that Chris Wiley gave us that show employee lists and directories where SCL Canada is listed there. We know that there's a huge amount of the huge number of projects that SCL and AIQ worked on together, and those staff teams worked on together going back a number of years. There's a document we published that Chris Wiley gave us, which was about a project in 2014 done for Ambassador Bolton's Super PAC, the campaigns they were supporting in the midterms in America that year. And again, there are staff members from SCL, Cambridge Analytica, AIQ, all working on the same projects, including Dr. Kogan as well. So the impression you get is one of a high level of integration and partnership. And the evidence we had from Chris Vickery yesterday, looking at these data sets he found on GitLab, would again suggest that this is an entity that is totally integrated.
Totally integrated. Well, that's very helpful. Our concern also that we couldn't get a clear answer from was how did this obscure company in Victoria, British Columbia, get every single contract for the Leave campaign? That didn't seem credible. The question is what would be the role of SCL? Were they, as the parent company, can you explain to us how SCL would have played a role in this, and the credibility of AIQ suddenly stepping into the Brexit campaign and getting all those contracts?
It's a really interesting question. I thought it was a great question that was asked about how they come to get this contract, given they supposedly had no links to the UK and were a relatively small company. So things we know. So Brittany Kaiser told us that there was an initial introduction to Leave.eu, the other campaign, Aaron Banks' campaign. So Steve Bannon made an introduction to Aaron Banks of Cambridge Analytica, and that Cambridge Analytica were working with Leave.eu from the autumn of 2015, and then through to the point where Leave.eu didn't get the nomination to be the official campaign. Now, Leave.eu say they never paid Cambridge Analytica for that work. They don't regard that they had a contractual relationship with them. There are still some questions around that. But then we know that in terms of links with Cambridge Analytica and SCL, that they seem to continue after the official designation was made. They were involved in supporting Aaron Banks' visit to Washington, D.C. before the referendum. There seem to be close links there. Some of these things are even detailed in Aaron Banks' book, and he refers in that to the fact they hired Cambridge Analytica. So there seems to be quite a strong relationship there. And then with AIQ, I think one of the things we're interested in understanding more about is how the introduction was made of AIQ to Vote Leave when Vote Leave got that official designation, who was responsible for that introduction. And it does seem very strange that you have, what at the time seemed to be unconnected companies, but companies that we know now, even if they weren't one legal entity, were highly coordinated in the way they worked together and were potentially advising two sides of the same campaign.
Well, that leads me to my next question, because we heard the news of SCL and Cambridge Analytica closing up shop, how hard it is for them. But I'm looking at this new company, Emmer Data Limited, that has the same address as SCL. Rebecca Ann Mercer from SCL, Jennifer Mercer from SCL, Julian David Wheatland from SCL, Alexander Taylor, Mr. Nix, all now working as directors at Emerdata. Have you looked at any of the role and the work of Emerdata? Is that part of your committee work at all?
So it's a good question. We've certainly asked questions about Emerdata, and we could, as you say, that seems to be completely connected to these other companies, and therefore, if Emerdata is holding information, documents, data sets that are relevant to our inquiry, there's no reason why we couldn't go after that, and the same would apply for the Information Commissioner as well. But because again, we seem to have a series of entities that are highly interconnected, same people, one would imagine using some of the same tools and information. I've not been there. This is the office, I think, in West Ferry Circus, I think, that the registered office you're referring to. Yeah. I've not been down there myself, but I was told by a journalist in London this morning who had, that there seems to be no evidence of anyone working at that address at all. And so again, the nature of this company and what it is and what it does, is unclear. But if that company is the legal guardian and owner of data and information and contracts that's relevant to our inquiry, then it would certainly fall within it.
Thank you. I received a letter last night from UpGuard that we'll present to committee today, and they're very concerned that this legal decision to shut down Cambridge Analytica could allow them to start erasing and getting rid of data. They're concerned about data that may be on other hosting sites, and they're looking to see if there's been any preservation requests for Cambridge Analytica data. SCL or Aggregate IQ has, in particular with third-party service providers such as Amazon Web Servers. Have you put any of those data preservation requests in?
No, that's not something we would do. That would probably be for the Information Commissioner to do. I don't know whether she has done that. I did speak to her earlier today, and she reassured me that as far as she was concerned, she had all the powers she needed to complete her investigation, and I know has access to and has received a large amount of data that they are currently working through. So, but you're right to raise these concerns. There may be data that's not yet fallen within the scope of the inquiries that we don't yet know about or have access to that could be destroyed. And I don't know if these are files held in the cloud by Amazon as a storage provider or another company. I don't know what the scope is to go back to that company and get the original files, even if an attempt was made to erase them. But that's certainly something I will put that question back to the Information Commissioner in the UK.
Very much.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. Next up for 7 minutes, Mr. Saney.
Hello, Mr. Collins. Thank you very much for coming here. I just wanted to first touch upon some testimony that was given in front of your committee by Mike Schroepfer, the Chief Technical Officer of Facebook. And to me, it seems that this whole situation began, as you said, with an article in The Guardian. And that time, ongoing, Facebook finally admitted that probably 87 million Facebook profiles were compromised, 1 million of them being in the UK. And under questioning regarding the influence on the Brexit referendum, Ms. Elliott asks, the campaign was run based on email list. It had acquired email list of people from some source, Mr. Kogan's app. And Mr. Schroepfer goes on to say that it could not have been his app because he didn't acquire any email list. But he says that Aggregate IQ must have acquired that data from some other source. Have you investigated what other source that could have been? Because it seems to me we're all chasing the same data, but the Chief Technical Officer is now saying, no, it could have been some other data.
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of quite important things there. With regards to the data collected from Dr. Kogan's survey, that would seem to be primarily psychological profiling of people that completed the survey, but then crucially linked to their Facebook profile. So to make it easy, and I think that's important then, because if you then take that data and add it to other data sets they may have acquired, and these could be email lists that the campaign group had acquired itself, you can then not only merge all those data sets together, you can also tie it back to the Facebook user profile as well, which helps you with your retargeting of the individual back through Facebook, where Facebook effectively acts like a giant telephone exchange, and you're programming the data in not generically to categories of people, but to actual named individuals. So Mike Schroepfer was saying that the Kogan data sets wouldn't have included email addresses. That could be right. They could have just found those emails in other ways. But from the evidence that we had from Chris Vickery yesterday, I think it's clear that you can have many multiple different data sets that you process together through your targeting tool, and then use that as a basis to re-advertise Facebook.
So there's an overlap going on with different data sets.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Also, in written in testimony, Mike Schroepfer says, and I quote, "We also found certain billing and administration connections between SCL, Cambridge Analytica, and AIQ." Have you done any research into any of these connections?
Well, no, this is one of the issues we want to follow up with Facebook to see if they can help us. And I wrote to Mark Zuckerberg on Monday with a list of over 40 outstanding questions and issues from the Mike Schroepfer session. That's one of the reasons why we want Zuckerberg to come back, because there are so many outstanding questions. But this is an important issue. I know that the Information Commissioner in the UK has been in contact with Facebook about her inquiry, but I think this is one of the key issues, because if one of the issues for, well, not just the Information Commissioner, but the Electoral Commission, in terms of UK election law, is there was coordination between different campaigns, that's an issue. And I think we want to understand more about the day-to-day coordination between these companies as well.
So do I have some time? Yeah. Okay. So I know yesterday Mr. Vickery had given you a hard drive. Now, it might be too soon, but have you started the analysis procedure of reviewing what's in the hard drive?
We haven't started that process yet. We're sort of putting our sort of apparatus in place to start it. It's a lot of information. I think it's he said that the compressed files are 19 gigabytes of data, so the whole files will take some time to go through, and so we need to get a team of people in place to do that. I also spoke to the we also spoke to the Information Commissioner as well to let her know that we have this data set, but as a parliamentary committee, we're keen to go through it ourselves to see what it contains. There may be information that's both relevant to our inquiry and that might help the Information Commissioner too. But it's going to be quite a task.
Are you going to make that information public? Would we have an ability to review the information also for the purposes of the work on this committee?
I would need to take a. We will. Our primary task is to go through the data to see what's there, and then to take advice on what we can publish. There'll be things that we want to publish as a committee, but we want to make sure that in doing that, it wouldn't prejudice other investigations that are underway. Although clearly the people that created this data set know what's in it, and it was taken down a few days after Chris Vickery discovered it. So they themselves will be aware of what it contains. But we would certainly be happy. I need to take advice on it from the UK authorities, but we would certainly be very happy to share information. And I believe as well that Chris Vickery, I think, would also be happy to share it with your committee directly.
The final question I have is that when we look at the amount of data profiles that were accessed by Cambridge Analytica, when you look at the worldwide downloads of that survey, it was about 270,000, and it led to 87 million profiles that were garnered. In Canada, there was about maybe 270, less than 300 profiles that were accessed, and here in Canada, 621,000 profiles were garnered. Now, according to Mr. Schroepfer's testimony, he says that 1,040 people had done the survey in the UK, which led to 1 million profiles being accessed. That, to me, mathematically, going on what we've heard, is a very low number. Is that a number that you're confident with, at 1 million only?
Well, this seems to be just from this app, and that's based on the number of people that took the survey, and then an average of, I think, the number of friends people had on Facebook at that time, and then that multiple gets you to around 1 million. But of course, the power of that is, well, and of course, there may have been other data sets and sources as well that were part of the data gathering exercise and then the targeting exercise that derived from that data. When Brittany Kaiser gave evidence to us, I mean, she said that you're a good sized working set of data, if you're going to plan a Facebook campaign, is around 40,000. If you've got around 40,000 profiles with good mapping data, understanding who those people are, what motivates them, that's your good sort of working set. And of course, you can then acquire lookalike audiences from Facebook as well to grow that and help you target a much wider group. So I think that even if that was the limit of the data that they acquired through Dr. Kogan's app, the power of that data is potentially significant. Kogan also said to us that he didn't think that data in and of itself was worth very much. Just the psychological surveying he was doing and the Facebook accounts they were linked to. But of course, it was never intended to be used in isolation. It was intended to be used as part of a much richer set of data, of which this was going to be an important part.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Saini. Next up for 5 minutes, Mr. Gord.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Collins, for your participation with our committee. It's very important for us. We are trying to demystify a whole number of issues. And I think we're looking at the Wild West, the digital era right now. Lawless society. Well, what's really of interest to us is the MO, the operating process, the modus operandi for the profiling, and perhaps the underlying strategy that these companies are. They select what company in which to establish themselves. They use a third country and where the rules and the laws are not the same, and they're very good at playing dodgem. We have a hard time getting a grasp on the entire picture because of this now you see me, now you don't, particularly during electoral periods in any of these countries, even in our own country. If the laws are different, the data is, perhaps belongs to Facebook, but it might be stored on a server somewhere else. They live off of advertising revenue, so we might be confusing what's available in which of 2 or 3 countries. Obviously, there's legitimate purposes for all of this. However, they might go out to the Cayman Islands or any other tax haven. We have no control as to where the revenue streams are coming from, where they're going to. Which end of the stick do we grasp to begin with? How do we start?
It's like the Hydra Greek mythology, a sort of multi-headed beast, and when you sort of cut one head off, another one springs up. I do think that these systems, these companies have been created to be as difficult to track and follow as possible. And I think you brought in money and finance there as well. Again, this was something we discussed with Chris Vickery yesterday about the interest these companies seem to have in cryptocurrency as well, which of course facilitates the movement of money from one place to another, for whatever reason, in a way that's very hard to trace. I think what we have to try and do, what we're trying to do with our work, is to sort of strip this back to some basic principles where we know we have jurisdiction. So there are laws about the way in which data can be gathered and used in elections. There are laws about the way in which campaigns can be funded and referendum campaigns can be funded, and around the coordination of different aspects of those campaigns. And in terms of data storage and user data belonging to citizens of a country, there are national laws that apply and national jurisdictions as well. So I think we can go after them. Regardless of where that company's based, they're processing data about UK citizens, and if they're doing so in the UK jurisdiction, any data processing, then we have clear jurisdiction there. As I said at the beginning to Mr. Erskine-Smith's question, this is one of the reasons why I think cooperation between our committees and by authorities in different countries is so important as well, because these companies and these investigations cross multiple boundaries, and to be successful, I think we need to be as integrated as possible.
Si on découvre, ou si vous découvrez plutôt...
Were we to discover after your inquiry, or during the inquiry, that there was undeclared sums of money spent by the Brexit campaign in intent to influence the results of the Brexit referendum, I suppose you have some recourse to justice, but would it in fact jeopardize the validity of the result of the Brexit referendum?
That's difficult to say at this moment in time. I think what we need to do is be able to identify what took place. Both the actions of the companies involved and the work of companies like AIQ in the campaign, The Electoral Commission will determine whether that was done within the rules. We've also been seeking to ask questions as well about Russian interference and involvement in elections in the UK. There's been work done that shows intent and activity from Russia to influence voters in both our last general election and in the Brexit referendum too. It's been harder to get information of that nature about Facebook, but there's clearly intent there as well. So these are all really important issues in understanding what took place. I think we can then lay it out, for people to see. It should inform the way in which we seek to protect our democracy in the future from the interference of bad actors. I think it's then a matter of for a debate for our country to say, well, if we feel and can demonstrate that the level of interference in the referendum was much greater than was previously suspected, does that change people's attitude or not? And the Electoral Commission, of course, can take action against people that committed offences, be they on spending or campaign, whatever.
Thank you, Ms. Shugard. Sam. Next up, Mr. Bayless for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Appreciate it very much. Our concern, obviously, is that we don't want to be part of this international network and have Canadian companies interfering with other jurisdictions' elections. This is very concerning for us. It's also very concerning as we see a pattern flowing out and pointing to Russian interference in a number of elections. I'd like to draw the process as I see it and hear your comments as we go along. If we start off with the Russian government, and they have their second largest oil company, Lukoil, which is presently under U.S. sanctions and has been operating as an arm of the Russian government. And as well, we know Mr. Alekperov is a former Soviet oil minister. This company somehow has money going to Mr. Alexander Kogan. He's the Cambridge researcher who's also, to my understanding, received money from the Russian government directly from and discussions with Lukoil and that. This person, Alexander Kogan, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, uses the cover of Cambridge University to do a little research project. If he was coming out of saying, I'm the Russian government doing a little research project, I'm not so sure that many people would have signed up. Do you see him as a key player, Mr. Kogan?
Well, we asked Dr. Kogan questions about his Russia connections when he gave evidence to our committee. As you say, he conducted, whilst he was at Cambridge, he also collaborated on a research project at the University of St. Petersburg that was funded by the Russian government, and that was into the use of cyberbullying techniques. Wasn't quite clear. Yeah.
But he's being funneled money from the Russian government. Now, somehow he connects with Mr. Alexander Nix, and we've had a number of company names, but we know Alexander Nix is both the CEO of SCL and Cambridge Analytica. So let's assume that they're one company. I know that whenever you seem to ask them questions, he'll say Cambridge Analytica had nothing to do with Lukoil. But we know that there were links between Lukoil and at least SCL. Is that correct?
Yes, that seems to be the case, yeah, from the information we received, particularly from Chris Wiley.
So we can assume then that Lukoil is funding both Alexander Kogan with an objective to go scrape a lot of information and then discussing at the same time with Alexander Nix, the CEO of both SCL and Cambridge Analytica, how to use that to interfere with elections.
Well, yes, so Dr. Kogan's job seems to be data scraping, whether he's doing it for elections or for other commercial work. There's then a question which has been floated by people giving evidence to the committee about the significance of Lukoil and the elections work. Is the purpose of the elections work just to gain introductions and to develop a relationship with powerful people in certain countries, in the hope that then commercial work comes later for big companies that will fund other things?
Yeah, but it would seem that to scrape data from 57 or how many millions of people would not be the business of Lukoil if they were in truly just the oil business. And as we know, they are sanctioned for operating as part of the Russian government. We also know that in the election on November 8th, the presidential election, we have proof now because Robert Mueller has charged 13 Russians and 3 Russian entities with purposely interfering. So we know that the Russians are interfering. They've been charged in the United States. Previous to that, we look at the Brexit, the same year, but in June of 23rd, this Russian connection got its hands everywhere, and suddenly a little Canadian company shows up, this little Canadian company called AIQ, whose president or CEO has his cell phone number listed as SCL Canada, and yet before this committee denied knowing anything about it. Does that make sense?
Well, no, it doesn't. And I share your concern that, it's been difficult to get straight answers on, what SCL Canada is versus AIQ, and are they the same thing? Because they certainly appear to be the same thing. And I think,
he had the nerve to tell us that. He had the nerve to tell us that he found out about this when he read in the paper that his cell phone was listed as SCL.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'd have to say, would AIQ have got this work that they did without their relationship with SCL?
Let's talk about that. So that's another question, and it brings me to my connecting the dots between how Russia, I truly believe, has interfered, as Robert Mueller has found, in the U.S. election and completely interfered in the Brexit vote, and done so purposely through funneling money to Mr. Alexander Kogan and connecting with Alexander Nix. Now, you have Vote Leave, a substantial sum of money from Vote Leave. Then you have Believe, and we learned that not only did Believe not get the money from Vote Leave, they contacted theoretically independently, and the two CEO and COO could not tell us how Believe even found out about them, but suddenly they get a phone call, order over $1 million Canadian dollars worth of services, and just point to say someone called from Vote Leave will call you up and pay our invoice. Then you have Veterans for Britain. Then you have DUP. You have 4 entities in the Brexit side contracting with this minute little company in Victoria, BC, and they were unwilling or unable to give us any clarity as how these people even knew about them, except for the fact that we could find that the CEO was completely linked with SCL.
Yeah. That's right, and we know, and then you can see how a link through SCL and Cambridge Analytica can go, can get to these parties in the UK, but it's hard to see how the Democratic Unionist Party would have decided to pick up the phone to Aggregate IQ. I mean, it's hard, it's impossible to see how that could be.
If I could sum it up,
Mr. Bayless. Yeah, I'd love to let you keep going, but I just would like to clarify, we do have the chair for 2 hours, so we're going to try and get some committee business at the very end, so don't worry, we can get you in. Thank you. We'll go up next to Mr. Kent for 5 minutes.
A slightly broader question, Mr. Collins. With the GDPR coming into effect, now I guess, do those regulations cover some of the matters that your committee is studying, or is it all going forward from today?
So GDPR comes into effect on the 25th of May. That's the deadline for the new laws coming in place, and House of Commons is got the final stages of the bill to implement the GDPR provisions next week. I think it enhances a lot of the data. A lot of the existing data protection law is already quite helpful for the inquiries that we're pursuing, because there are already quite tough restrictions on holding political data about people and who can do it. I think one of the big questions we've posed through our inquiry, and why we supported the Information Commissioner getting these additional powers to support her investigations, is how do we know that a company like Facebook is compliant with GDPR rules? If someone puts in a request for their data back or data to be destroyed, how do we know it's been complied with? If someone asks for their data back and they want data that's been acquired by Facebook developers as well who polices that? And I think the best way we can do that, I think, is to make sure the authorities have got these no-notice powers just to go in and take data and inspect data where they believe a breach may have occurred. But I think this is one of the big questions for us when GDPR comes in, is can we make sure that it's being enforced correctly and the companies are actually doing what they're being asked to do.
So will monitoring and enforcement and penalty applications be a result of national parliaments, or will there be an EU super department that would have that responsibility and would require those resources to monitor?
It would be the national authorities would have the responsibility. So the UK government's policy is to have equivalence in data regulation with the rest of the EU. So even after Brexit, we'll be operating to the same rules. but it'd be the national authority, the Information Commissioner, to enforce those rules. I think it's also worth mentioning that even though we have European standards for data management through GDPR, there are different requirements in different countries as well for different reasons. So Facebook in Germany runs to different rules than Facebook in the UK because it has to comply with German legislation on hate speech and therefore employs vast numbers of people to take down posts that would be in breach of Germany's data protection laws and Facebook would be penalised itself if it failed to do that. So even within common European standards, you can still have quite different jurisdictional requirements in different member states.
Now, you've cautioned Mr. Zuckerberg that should he come to the UK within your jurisdiction, you would in all probability call him. There's a possibility of the subpoena. But in more general terms, will you consider recalling Facebook as your inquiry continues? Or you're obviously not satisfied with the answers that you've received to date.
No, that's right, and that's why when I wrote to Mark Zuckerberg on Monday, it wasn't just to formalise the request and to notify him that we would summons him if he doesn't respond, but also to set out in writing the questions that remain unanswered from the evidence session we had with Facebook, and some of them are on really serious issues, which we do want answers to. And one of the things which we've not talked about so far today is this whole question of dark ads. So I asked Mike Schrepfer, if someone sets up a Facebook page, posts dark ads, which can only be seen by the person receiving the ad and the person that put it up, puts up thousands of these during a campaign, as soon as the campaign stops, deletes that page and all the content with it, is there any record it ever existed? And he said he didn't know. And if the answer to that question is no, that is really serious. That is a massive breach in our rules, and it gives people massive power to impact what people see during an election campaign. They don't have to declare it, and there'd be no record it ever took place.
And to Mr. Gould's question, if the Commissioner's findings are that, in fact, the Brexit vote was stolen, one has the very large question of whether another vote must be held or could be held. What's the discussion in the Parliament?
Well, I think at the moment people would want to see evidence that happened. Ultimately, it would be for the Parliament to decide whether it wanted another referendum or not. There are people who are calling for that, but that's largely because they just don't like the result of the first one. But I think this would inform a bigger national debate about what to do next. But at the moment, I don't think there will be a consensus in favour of a second referendum.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kent. Next up for 5 minutes, Ms. Shepard.
A very simple question to start. Do you require a MLAT request in order to exchange information based on my colleague's request to have access to the hard drive you're going to have, or just a simple letter from our chair will suffice?
I need to take advice from the clerks on that, just to see how we can share information or not, whether we can do that without publishing the material. It may be better for you to request that information directly from Mr. Vickery, and he certainly indicated to us that he'd be willing to share information with you. But perhaps we can continue that discussion after this session.
Okay, good. With respect to your inquiry, apparently companies had access to document related to Google. Are you aware of any implication from Google?
We've not had information about Google data, Google information being used, but we'd certainly be interested in looking at that if there is evidence of it. Okay.
In a broader approach on the problem, we have a situation. I'll give you an anecdote. In the 50s in Quebec, there were some priests apparently that that said that in their speech that the sky is blue and hell is red. And apparently they were referring to political parties according to their color. And I guess this is, if not fake news, at least it's propaganda. The issue is freedom of speech. It's not new that we are bombarded with all kinds of fake news and false information It's a technique of World War II, and it's been going on for centuries. So we although we end up with a situation where my information is used to provide me with all kinds of false information, there's nothing much I can do against that, since someone can say anything he wants. It's for me to believe it or not and make my decision based on my own knowledge. It's not might not be moral, might not be fine to do that, exchange information and exploit information this way, but the end of it, I cannot do that much about that. So my problem is not the fact that I'm bombarded with all kinds of false information. My question, or my problem, my challenge is that I need to find a way to better monitor how people deal with my information. Consequently, should I prohibit that and therefore put at risk all the companies where the business plan is based on selling information for advertising and so on and so on?
So I think there are a number of important points in that. I would create a distinction between pure fake news and what you might call hyper-partisan content. We know, for example, the Pope didn't endorse Donald Trump. That is clearly a lie, and therefore to act against that as a form of bad, harmful content when someone's spreading known lies, I think we can say, well, I put that in a category of harmful content we'd want companies like Facebook and Google to act against spreading. There's then this question of this hyper-partisan content, which could be biased, propaganda, as you say. And there, I think the question is, do people understand why they're receiving it? And can they do anything about receiving it? So, for example, I was concerned, and these problems seem to have got worse since Facebook allowed advertising through the newsfeed. So you could advertise straight into the newsfeed. I asked Mike Schroepfer about this, saying, if you didn't want to receive political ads, can you stop them? The answer is no. You could be targeted with political messaging, and there's nothing you can do to not receive it. You could receive many, many of these political messages that have been targeted at you based on, unbeknown to you, a psychological profiling that's been done of your interests and fears and concerns. And you can't stop receiving them. And you may also not know who's sending them to you. And indeed, what's been exposed in the Internet Research Agency's work is what you thought could be a community group concerned about an issue you're concerned about is actually someone in St. Petersburg targeting you with propaganda, and you've got no way of knowing. So I think there are questions there about how people can turn off political advertising from the newsfeed if they don't want to receive it, which is a policy issue for Facebook, but also to have more transparency over who's sending you information. Because if someone in my constituency in the election period got a leaflet from me through the door and they weren't a Conservative voter, they would weigh up what I'd said against the fact that I'm a Conservative, and they think, well, am I going to believe that because I know that he's got a biased political opinion because he's a politician representing a political party? But you can make that judgment based on knowledge. But what you can't do with this messaging on Facebook is use the same effect, because you don't know who's sending it to you. Also, I don't think enough people understand why they see what they see, that they see more of the content they engage with. So what they're seeing doesn't reflect a broad sweep of opinion. What they see is the opinions of people that they most agree with, and that's continually reinforced.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Picard. Next up for 3 minutes is Mr. Angus.
Thank you. When Facebook came to our committee, I was very surprised for a corporation this big that we couldn't get straight answers from them either. They became aware of the Kogan, the effect of that Kogan app 3 years ago, but they proudly announced to us that 3 weeks ago they told Canadians that their data had been breached. That's a violation of Canadian law. They must have certainly known that was a violation of Canadian law, and yet it seemed that Facebook didn't seem to think that they were bound by Canadian law until this scandal came into international attention. In your discussions with Facebook at committee and that, how have you felt that they've seen their role in terms of their obligations to European law, UK law, domestic law?
Well, I think it's been a frustrating process dealing with Facebook. When we started our inquiry, we asked them for evidence of Russian interference in the referendum, and they refused to look. So unless we could find evidence that there had been, they wouldn't look to check for themselves. I think the frustration we've had that they allowed the Facebook ad checking team allowed ads to be bought using foreign currency from a foreign country in elections in America, certainly in breach of election law, and to a very small extent that happened in the UK as well. And why weren't they looking there too? As you rightly say, there was no disclosure to the Information Commissioner in the UK of a data breach involving potentially up to 1 million UK citizens. If it hadn't been for the Guardian article, I don't think Facebook would have asked any questions themselves about this. All they did then was write to the people concerned, asking them to delete the data, but didn't notify the users that had been affected. Chris Wiley said that even when they were made aware of this, he wasn't contacted by Facebook for, I think, 6 to 9 months, asking whether he'd still got this data and whether he should delete it. When they became aware of the fact that Cambridge Analytica were working on Ted Cruz's campaign and the Trump campaign, and yet they had potentially access to this data set they shouldn't have had, there seems to be no checking or double checking to see whether they'd actually destroyed the data or not. You see a pattern of behaviour which I think looks like a company seeking to turn a blind eye rather than get to the bottom of it.
Well, this is, I think, really concerning because Sandy Paraklis, who did speak to your committee, I raised some of Sandy Paraklis' concern to Facebook Canada, and we didn't get a clear answer. But he was really concerned about a growing black market in Facebook data, and that black market could be used by, terror gangs, corrupt people. I mean, the fact that the Kogan app has potentially had such a massive impact, other breaches could be very serious. But Paraklis had said that Facebook told him they didn't want to be looking into this because he said, quote, Facebook was in a stronger legal position if it didn't know that the abuse was happening. Is that your experience in dealing with Facebook's response to the Kogan breach?
Well, I mean, just to give a bit of background on the Kogan breach and Facebook, we took evidence in Washington from Facebook in February, and we asked them about whether there had been data breaches, whether Cambridge Analytica had acquired large amounts of Facebook user data, when there'd last been a breach. We didn't get answers on any of those issues. The company knew about this issue at the time. They didn't disclose it to us and are not able to explain now why that was the case. And Mike Stretford was asked about that at length when he gave evidence to us last week. So we find all of that deeply concerning, because I think what would have been an honest answer to those questions would be to say, yeah, we are aware of breaches by developers. This is what happened. This is the action we took. This is what we do to satisfy ourselves that this has been contained. Mark Zuckerberg was asked in Congress about other developers doing similar things. We asked Mike Stretford about this last week. There are still no answers from Facebook about that. I think the concern that we share is if it was so easy for Dr. Kogan to do this work, first, probably lots of other people could have done it too. And who else, Dr. Kogan worked with other people. Did other people share those techniques, and was this practice quite widespread? And that wouldn't at all surprise me in that regard, that there could be a black market in this sort of user data. I've not seen evidence of it yet myself, but it would, if people like Sandy Paraklis are telling us is that a huge amount of data was taken and no one knows what happened to it, it wouldn't be at all surprising if it was being traded in that way.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. Mr. Collins, we did ask you originally if there's some information that we would need to go in camera with regard to. Well, I've talked to all the vice chairs in the committee, and we still want to hold it in public if that's possible. Are you okay with that, or would you prefer to go in camera?
That's fine by me. And if there are at the end any in-camera issues you want to discuss, I'm happy to do that as well.
Okay, perfect. So we'll continue on then. We'll go up for the next 7 minutes with Mr. Bayless.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. I'd like to continue along the line of questions that we were doing. Leave EU. Who was in charge of Leave EU?
So that was a campaign that was led by Nigel Farage and supported by Aaron Banks, businessman, and Andy Wigmore was the communications director of Leave.eu. There were competing forces in the UK were seeking to get the nomination to be the official designated No campaign. I believe the reason there ended up being these two entities is Vote Leave seemed to be led by Eurosceptic politicians in the Conservative Party and the Labour Party.
Who was Vote Leave led by?
So Dominic Cummings was the sort of communications director. But Vote Leave, the leading political figures in Vote Leave were Eurosceptic members of the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. So Boris Johnson, Michael Gove were the sort of political figureheads of Vote Leave when the referendum was called. But the executive leadership of it came from people like Matthew Elliott and Dominic Cummings.
So if I understand something here, and what I'd like to do, just to simplify it, I think we only have 3 entities working here. There's a number of names and a number of different groups in that, but I really think there's 3 entities. The Russians, the Brexit vote, call it Vote Leave, Be Leave, Leave EU, Veterans, DUP, and then you have a group called SCL, you have Cambridge Analytica, you have AIQ. So there's 3 groups. Now, to my understanding, Leave EU began the discussions with SCL and Cambridge Analytica before they did not win. So they had already set in place a series of motions. Is that correct, that they had begun these discussions?
Yes, and more than discussions. So we were told by Brittany Kaiser that Steve Bannon introduced Cambridge Analytica to Aaron Banks. That was the connection there. And that they worked up detailed plans for how Cambridge Analytica would run the referendum campaign for Leave.eu if they got the nomination.
So Leave EU starts this process, and quite a detailed process, to use this company, and I'll call it SCL, Cambridge, or AIQ. It's one company. We can say that. They start this discussion, but they lose out, Nigel Farage loses out the official designation, and it drops to Vote Leave.
That's right.
Yeah. But suddenly, Vote Leave shows up at SCL, Cambridge Analytica, AIQ, this one company, to request exactly the same services that have been put in place by Leave EU. Is that correct?
Well, yes. Yeah, that's correct.
So it would be fair for me to say that Leave EU and Vote Leave were completely coordinated on using this company to do its dirty work.
Well, there you have an area of dispute, a quite violent dispute between Leave.eu and Vote Leave, who have both been adamant in saying there was no coordination between them. And indeed, Aaron Banks and Dominic Cummings in particular are often trading blows on social media or in their articles.
I'm sure they are, because to my understanding, if they were, they have broken UK law. And
that would be correct.
There is a series of potential, how would I say, coincidences which belie logic, which are not reasonable. So we know Leave EU starts this process, and they get heavily into it, but they don't get the money. So the money goes to Vote Leave, and suddenly Vote Leave continues the exact same process. They can be in violent disagreement of how it happened, but this we do know has happened. Then, to offshore it, a small Canadian company whose CEO of AIQ, it's a Canadian company, was also listed as the CEO of SCL Canada. So it's the same company. And Cambridge Analytica is between them, but it's the same company. They start doing work for Vote Leave. They start doing work nominally for Be Leave, but paid by Vote Leave. And they don't even deny that anymore. Veterans for Britain shows up. DUP shows up. All for this unknown small Canadian company offering nothing of unique value. We asked them very clearly, is there some special skill that would bring them across the ocean to the far end of our country to use? No, nothing special. So that one group is coordinated. And it is my belief that you have to do a lot of questions to see how your laws were broken, but they were broken. And for this group to say, well, we didn't know, and for them to put on a public display of being at odds with each other is nonsensical, because the facts are they showed up at the same place to request the same services, and they offshored things. Now, they paid it, though. So that means to me that your laws at least were broken in the UK. The same thing is true now with the Russians showing up. The Russian government, with their former oil minister who's now running Lukoil, who's supporting Alexander Kogan, and he goes in and scrapes all this data off. Now, the question I'd like to ask is, how did Alexander Kogan connect with Alexander Nisk, the CEO of this organization? How did the researcher who stole this data, whether he had no right to do it, so let's say what he did, he stole this data, suddenly it's handed over to this company that's operating for Vote Leave, Believe, Leave, all these, it's operating for them. So he's handed data. Do you know how those two connected?
Well, my understanding on that, I think based on, Chris Wiley's testimony to us, is that, and also Dr. Kogan's written statement as well, which we published on our committee side, is that Cambridge Analytica they did quite a lot of work working with academics at Cambridge University and through the Cambridge Psychometric Centre, and that was how the connection to Dr. Kogan was made. That he was working there, he was someone they took an interest in, and they started working on projects together. And Dr. Kogan's company, though, was set up, it would seem, specifically to work on projects with Cambridge Analytica. But I think to your earlier statement as well, I mean, we also are interested in pursuing this exact line of questioning, and that's why we want to get in Dominic Cummings, and we're also, Aaron Banks and Andy Wigmore, we're interested in talking to them too about these issues to understand the points you've raised about how these relationships started.
Yeah, I think you'd be well served to just start looking at them as one group. They're going to deny that because if I understand they're denying it, they have not broken the law. But the coincidences are beyond just coincidences. They are actively coordinating. And the same is true for SCL, Cambridge Analytica, AIQ, or SCL Canada, all one organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bayless. Next up, Mr. Gord for 7 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thanks again, Mr. Chair. I am aware that some pollsters, analysts, data specialists, senior people who have quite a bit of experience, now retired in some cases, seems that Canadian mentalities may have changed over the last decade. Beginning of the aughts to about 2010, it seemed that the environment was fairly stable, even in electoral periods. You might go up a quarter point or half a point or a tenth of a point in the ratings over that period. But then again, you might see 0.5, 0.7, 1% change in 5 or 7 days in their voting intentions. People were saying, well, it's due to the speed of the technology today, the speed of information, and perhaps this diffusion and dissemination of fake news. We don't have the time to correct false news. In fact, once the cat's out of the bag, it's gone. People who may not have made up their minds are influenced by that. And Facebook, well, it's fairly common throughout the population today. If they haven't made up their minds yet, they might not be paying too much attention to the official news, if you will, but they're more influenced by the social news. Historically, media conducted themselves with a certain degree of ethics. Radio, television, print were not purposely putting forward any fake news. There's no way we can check on Facebook or the social media. Anybody can plant false news, a rumor, or whatever, and it gains speed with heavy leverage. A few days before an election, if we find that there was some false news, which may have changed the results of the election, what can we do?
This is something obviously people are thinking about at this moment in time. Should we say that there is a liability for the big tech platforms to act against known sources of fake news and disinformation, particularly during election periods? We know that Facebook track their users' activity not just on the site, but on other sites too. So I think they have got the technical capability to identify people who are potential sources of fake news and disinformation and to bar them from the site or to disrupt what they're doing. So I think that would be an important step for us to take. In France, they are discussing having a sort of 24/7 judge that you can go to during an election who will give a ruling on whether something is fake news or not and whether it should be taken down or not. We could, of course, go the German routes, which they use on hate speech in particular, but to say, well, there could be heavy fines for organisations that are involved in the dissemination of disinformation. I think this is going to be an increasingly important debate. I think in Western countries. I think we have been late to the party on this. I think if you talk to people, countries in Eastern Europe and the Baltic states and Ukraine, this has been an issue they've been dealing with for many years, of certainly Russian interference in their politics through disinformation. And that we know with new technologies, the power of augmented reality to create videos of you giving a speech you've never given in a place you've never been. People are going to need trusted news sources, and we're going to need to do more to, I think, make it clear to people what the trusted sources are, the ones that don't have a reputation for spreading disinformation, and to identify and call out those that do.
Merci beaucoup, puis soyez
Thank you very much, and rest assured that you have the full collaboration of all the parties here in Canada, in conjunction with anything that you might be doing in the UK, to try to resolve this situation, or at least get a handle on it. It could be useful for all, and perhaps it would set the mark for other countries as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Next up, for 7 minutes, Mr. Angus.
Thank you very much. UpGuard, in their analysis of the AIQ data set, said that AIQ used Amazon Web Servers. Have your officials looked into any of possible use by Cambridge Analytica or aggregate third-party service providers such as Amazon Web Servers, where maybe unexamined information may still exist?
That's not something as a committee that we've done. I don't know whether the Information Commissioner has done that either, whether she's made a request to Amazon. But I think you're right to suggest that these third-party hosting platforms, companies, may well be holding important data that could be relevant to those inquiries.
Yeah, UpGuard had identified GitHub, Amazon Web Services, and they also identified Facebook, that there may be relevant data that may necessarily be caught and preserved in order to be able to actually find out what's going on, particularly with SCL closing up shop. So would you have within your committee the powers to order the access to that data, or do you go through your privacy commissioner?
It would depend. So the GitHub, GitLab data we've got from Chris Vickery. If we wanted to go in camera at the end of the session, I could probably tell you a little bit more about the discussion we had with Chris Vickery about that. We can order papers, documents, records to be supplied to us within the jurisdiction of the UK. The issue that we would have would be seeking to order the production of materials that's being hosted outside of the UK. The Information Commissioner is probably better placed to do that, as she has the power to work with obviously other law enforcement agencies in other territories and work through them in the normal way. I know that the Information Commissioner has been discussing requests for information with Facebook. I don't know whether they've had those conversations with Amazon as well.
One of the things that was surprising reading Chris Wiley's comments and testimony about SCL, he claimed that his predecessor had been killed in, I think, Kenya. He said that people are afraid and intimidated. He said that they work internationally on some very suspect campaigns, and he said in order to influence governments, and that's where the real money was. We found Mr. Massingham to be very reluctant to say anything. Do you think that there's any credibility in Mr. Wiley's claims about SCL, that people are afraid of them?
Well, I can understand that. When we spoke with Brittany Kaiser about SCL's work in Nigeria, for example, now we know from information that Chris Wiley provided to us that there were very violent films made for that campaign. They seem to have employed a group of consultants to work on the ground who were ex-Secret Service agents from Israel. We don't know. No one seems to know very much about their backgrounds or what they were doing. But certainly looking at some of the materials of that campaign, it looked particularly unpleasant. And I think this is an area. Whilst it sort of gets away a bit from the core bit of our inquiry, I think there's lots of concern that's been raised about the ethics of the work that was being done. And indeed, with Cambridge Analytica, with Alexander Nix, the investigation done by Channel 4 News in the UK, the undercover filming where they were talking about hiring sex workers to compromise politicians in different countries to try and influence the result of an election campaign. That says a lot about the ethics and practices of a company like that.
Well, I'm looking at this Emmer Data spreadsheet of their corporate structure with an address that you say apparently nobody's at the address. But there's connections now through almost all the SCL main directors are now at Emmer Data. Johnson Chung Shun Ko, also director, who's apparently tied with companies to the Chinese government, and also business partner with Eric Prince, who's well known for international mercenary work. What do you think the potential for maintaining quaint little things like democratic elections in our countries are when we have very, very powerful companies that are starting to move into this data control? We saw it with SCL. We saw the effects in Brexit. If we see these new companies being formed with connections, whether it's to the Russians or to the Chinese state or to international mercenaries, what do we have to do to ensure the integrity of our domestic electoral systems?
I think we have to recognise this for what it is, which is a new kind of threat. My concern sometimes is that the work our governments do looking at cybersecurity is looking at defending institutions and infrastructure from direct cyber attack. But have we been looking for this more subtle approach of undermining democracy and public confidence in institutions through not a direct cyber attack, but by using data and information to try and influence the outcome of elections? Now, there could be different motivations for people doing that. The motivation of a company to do that, using, as we've been told, using what would be considered weapons-grade information warfare in other countries and also back in our own country as well. The motivation for doing that, is that just to make money, or is it about political influence? For the Russian state, it seems that their sort of modus operandi is to create discord, to turn communities against each other. They may not necessarily have a direct political interest in the outcome, but they want to create as much disruption as possible to undermine people's confidence in democracy. And it could be that these actors, they may have common interests, but actually separate. But I think they've recognised that you can use these tools, particularly on social media, to support these campaigns and also to polarise political debate and opinion as well. And the consequence of that really has been in many countries, particularly in Europe, is the collapse of the centre in politics and people being pushed increasingly to the margins and political debate and discourse being increasingly aggressive. And I think we have to recognise this as a major threat to democracy.
Thank you. Finally, if you'd read the transcripts of our testimony with Mr. Massingham, and in my 14 years, I've never, ever seen someone refuse to treat our parliamentary committees with the respect and give straight answers. Would you think it'd be worth our while to invite Mr. Massingham back to answer some more questions?
Well, yes, I do. I mean, we're in a similar position with Alexander Nix. We want him to come back because we believe there are serious questions about the honesty of his testimony to the committee, and we want to challenge him on that. I watched the session that you had with AIQ. Obviously, my direct concern then was the answers they gave about their cooperation with the Information Commissioner, which I think were completely disingenuous. It's quite clear for the Information Commissioner they've not been. They may have responded to letters, but they're not cooperating with her investigation, and it's still not. And I think it was misleading of them to try and insinuate to your committee that they were.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. Next up, Mr. Erskine-Smith for 7 minutes.
Thanks very much. And just while we're on the topic of information commissioners, your information commissioner has significant powers. Ours has very modest powers when it comes to compelling testimony and compelling the production of documents, but certainly can't issue fines, can't make orders in the same way. How important do you think it is for an information commissioner in the modern age to have significant new powers to address some of the concerns that we've seen with Cambridge Analytica and Facebook and SCL?
I think it's really important. I think it's important that they have got the ability not just to request documents and information, but to go and take them. if the company refuses to do that. And the powers to fine should be significant. I think we should also discuss whether it should go beyond that as well, because if you're a very wealthy individual like Robert Mercer, you might think, well, actually, if the only risk in certain countries is that someone might get a minor fine for a breach of data protection law, I'm happy to pay those fines, and I'll price that into the cost of doing work. The very wealthy people can afford to take those risks. Therefore, it's right that in territory, in our national territories, our agencies have got the power to find the truth, get the information, know what's going on, and then I think the powers to take significant action against companies who are in breach of the law.
A number of my colleagues have asked about Brexit. I found it incredibly interesting when Mr. Massingham indicated that he knew at the time that had the £625,000 come from Vote Leave on behalf of Vote Leave, that there would have been an election finance violation at that time. Had you known that beforehand?
What that if that had been paid by Vote Leave? Yeah, I mean, that I think is.
Yeah, well, there was just knowledge amongst the players at the time that had this happen, paid by Vote Leave, as Vote Leave, that there would have been an election finance law. I didn't know that we'd get an answer from AIQ that they would confirm that they were aware of that at the time.
No, I'm surprised by that too, and I thought it was one of the most significant moments in that testimony. To me, it seems to be a pretty clear violation.
And if there is, I mean, we've touched on this a little bit, but when it comes to a referendum like Brexit, and it's such a close outcome, but it's such a significant outcome for the country, and if there's been election finance violations that have had an impact on the outcome, it seems to me there would be strong grounds for that referendum to be set aside based on the unwritten principles of your Constitution. What do you think about that?
Well, at this moment in time, I think it's something that I think people need to see it laid out in front of them. They need to see the proof and the evidence of what took place, the scale of it, how many people that may have impacted upon directly. And I think that would then inform a debate about what we should do about it. And the consequences of that are clearly greater than just taking action against individuals for breaking the law.
Of course. When it comes to cooperation with AIQ, so you'd mentioned that AIQ continues to refuse to cooperate with your information commissioner. They've indicated some willingness to attend before your committee, but nothing's confirmed. So given just timing, I mean, AIQ is the Canadian player over which we have jurisdiction, and you've heard from witnesses that certainly are going to refuse to attend before us, from Kogan to Nix, and hopefully you get Zuckerberg, I'm not sure. But AIQ is the company under our jurisdiction, and do you think it's imperative in terms of timing? At what point should we have them back, in your view? And is there anything else we can do to further your investigation, given the timeline where you said you want to conclude this by the end of before the summer recess?
Well, I think you've got strong grounds to call AIQ back in your own right, because of the concerns about the testimony they gave. I hope that we will be able to agree a date with them very soon. I hope we'll be in a position to announce that next week, and that they would give evidence to us before the end of this month. That's certainly something we'd like to see happen. But certainly, if we're in a position where we're interviewing witnesses that may not otherwise be able to come to your committee, and there are questions or issues that you'd like us to cover off on your behalf, we'd certainly be very happy to do that.
Okay, I would appreciate that. When we had Mr. Vickery before us, he indicated that when he had reviewed the data set, it was likely that this overlapping and sort of master data set comprised of election lists, comprised of, he even suggested some commercial information from the Koch brothers. He suggested the information from Cambridge Analytica and the Facebook breach, and potentially others. And he said that certainly this information had been used for election purposes, but he also said it might have been used for commercial purposes as well. And I wonder, have you gone down this road in your inquiry? Do you know more than we do whether such information has been used for commercial purposes?
We know that he said that there were links in the data set to advertising networks who would therefore be engaged in commercial work. I mean, the way he describes the way the data set is collected, it would certainly have that application. You effectively have a store of information about people that's linked to their profiles. You can add other information to that may be more specific to political campaigns, but that information is still going to be very useful for commercial campaigns as well. And also that he sees these data sets as a kind of almost a living organism to which you're constantly adding new data and information, and that you can just call up information and create new data sets, new audience groups out of this master set whenever you want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the idea that you would collect information for political purposes and use it for commercial purposes is certainly against our law, and I expect against your law as well.
Indeed.
When it comes to transparency rules of targeting and advertising, and you've mentioned this a few times, do you think when it comes to cooperation, certainly we can cooperate on the inquiry itself in terms of getting at the right questions for the right players, and if we've got jurisdiction over certain individuals, we can assist in your inquiry. But when it comes to the outcomes and the recommendations, do you think there is value in having consistency of rules across jurisdictions, especially when it comes to, say, the transparency of advertising in elections?
Yes, I do. I think I do. I mean, there obviously will be the scope for different countries to have different rules in place, but I certainly think on transparency that would be much better, much more effective. It could be enforced across the board, and I think so. There are the same similar rules in all countries relating to how they use services like Facebook. I see no reason why that shouldn't be the case. I mean, the case of Germany is Germany. Germany's quite a good example because there may be very specific national reasons why certain rules are in place, and those conditions may not apply in the same way in other countries. But I think some of these basic points about transparency, I think, should apply globally. I said my concern as well about should there be political advertising in the newsfeed or on Facebook, or if there is, should people have the right to turn it off? I think is an important point, but that's really about the way the platform works as a whole, rather than I think individual countries.
I appreciate it, and I look forward to cooperating as we go forward.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Kent.
Thank you, Chair. And I just have one last question to the point of Facebook's acknowledgement of allowing serious privacy breaches. Mr. Zuckerberg's apology before congressional committees. When Facebook executives appeared before our committee, they assured us that thousands of employees monitored Facebook looking for disinformation, fake news, and that many thousands more would be hired going forward to address the realities that have been discovered through the Cambridge Analytica scandal, AIQ and so forth. But we reminded Facebook that some Russian disinformation that had been posted a year ago regarding Canadian troops participating in the NATO Operation Reassurance to the Baltic countries was, in fact, it was ridiculous stuff. One of the postings suggests to Latvians that Canadian troops would be encouraging homosexuality on the Latvian population. Another one said that our Muslim defense minister would be leading a Muslim takeover of Latvia. When I offered to the Canadian CEO that in fact those postings are still up and very open and aware to folks in Latvia as well as in Canada who might be following Latvian affairs, he expressed surprise and asked for the link to assist in Facebook taking it down. Have any similar occasions of glaring disinformation come before your committee during your inquiry?
Well, we have, I think, a similar area of concern, which is that when complaints are made to Facebook about content on their site, which is misleading or wrong, or it might be more sort of harmful material, that the company don't always take it down, and they don't take it down either at all or quickly enough. And that, to me, would suggest they don't have the resources in place to do that effectively, and that is clearly a ground for concern for the future. I think as well that they can use, they should not only act quicker on user referral, but they should use the tools they have to try and identify for themselves whether content is likely to be problematic or open to challenge, and then investigate themselves and take it down. We know that they can track where information is being, what users do on the site and off the site, and who they're engaging with and what they're doing. And they do that, they say, for security reasons. So I think they could use those techniques to identify the sources of this information. I think they're talking about with news and fake news, having more transparency over who is posting this information and where they are based, who they are, with political advertising, having to do that from a page where you verified your location and your identity as part of setting up that page to place ads. So I think they're looking to change some of their policies in a way that will be helpful. But for me, this is when you then come back to the question about liability. If we say, well, we want you to act in this way, and you don't do it, is there a liability in law that can be enforced against them for not doing it?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kent. Mr. Saini for 5 minutes.
Mr. Collins, I want to just ask two questions, one specific, and this concerns maybe some commentary on your part of why Andy Wigmore of Leave.eu would refer to AIQ as SCL Canada in an interview with Emma Bryant, if they themselves weren't referring to themselves in that manner.
Well, this is right. I think what you've rightly discovered and highlighted is that this is what the people who worked in this company used, referred to. That's what they thought AIQ was. And it's not just one person's view might have got it wrong. This seems to be a consistent view being discussed about what this entity is.
So I just want to paint a broader picture, just so you can help me understand, or help the committee understand, as to the effect of this issue on the Brexit campaign. You had a very close election result, 51.9% to 48.1%. Less than 4%, 3.8% to be exact. You had 30 million people who casted a vote, which just happens to be about 1 million people, right? You've come out now and said that you were trying to conclude your investigation by July, right? Since Article 50 was triggered 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, you have now the departing of the UK from the EU will happen at 11 p.m. UK time on Friday, 29th of March, 2019. So that's a little less than a year. So you have had this run up to this date by companies, corporations, organizations that are divesting themselves, that are making maneuvers, that are readjusting their alignment. You have UK citizens that live in other parts of the EU who are also thinking about where they're going to fit in the new relationship. Your investigation is going to conclude in July, whatever your recommendations will be. There will probably be further investigations. If it is determined that the Brexit result was compromised, isn't it effectively too late? Because the momentum, the shift, the resources, everything is working towards this date, the negotiations, all the energies that's being consumed right now for that date, isn't it effectively too late as to what the conclusions of this inquiry will be?
Well, also to be clear as well, we have looked at issues connected with the referendum because they've been relevant to our inquiry, but we're not investigating the referendum itself. The Electoral Commission is investigating these issues, and the Electoral Commission will be the body that will determine whether it believes laws were broken, and indeed will then recommend on what should be done next. And in the past, they've imposed fines, people have gone to prison for breaches of election law. But that's a matter for the Electoral Commission to determine. All we can do is pursue our investigation and lay out the evidence that we've uncovered, and ultimately it will be for Parliament to determine if it feels that there should be a reconsidering of the referendum itself, whether that should be rerun. That will be a decision for Parliament to make.
Much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Saini. Last up, Mr. Angus has a letter you'd like to...
Yes, I just want to, I received this letter last night at 11 o'clock, and I haven't had a chance to have it translated into 2 official languages, and I'm very clear that we do not present documents unless they're in both official languages, but I would like to present it to the committee so that it could be shared, because it was written to Chair Zimmer, Vice Chair Mr. Ishkin, as well as myself, from Mike Box, co-CEO of UpGuard in Mountain View, California, Greg Pollock, and John Hendren as well, their Director of Strategy. I'm not going to read the whole letter, but there's key elements just to put on the record, as well with Mr. Collins being here, that we at UpGuard are reaching out to you Honorable Chair, Vice Chairs of the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics regarding an important matter of privacy and data integrity affecting not just Canadian citizens but individuals around the world. The issue of preserving any and all relevant data stored by companies Aggregate IQ, Cambridge Analytica, and SCL on the systems of external services, including but not limited to GitHub, Amazon Web Services, is a matter of great urgency and public significance. They go on to say, the news that Cambridge Analytica and SCL are being dissolved raises serious questions. Is there more data out there hosted on using services such as AWS that would be relevant to inquiries in US, UK, and Canada into all three companies? We write to you in the hope that public servants might immediately put forward data preservation requests to GitHub, Amazon, Facebook, and other relevant data services to freeze and preserve the data in any accounts used by Aggregate IQ, Cambridge Analytica, and SCL. They go on to say, we hope this data preservation request will be made public, as ultimately the directors for all these companies should be held accountable. We fear that if the proverbial paper trail is wiped, important information could be lost of interest to the relevant international inquiries, and that the risk of one cluster of companies have the key to all this data, yet turn a blind eye to it, of all the egregious uses of their platform without governance nor controls in place for transparency or oversight into their operations. It would compound the potential issues under investigation were this data now to disappear with the dissolution of Cambridge Analytica and SCL. And they've listed a series of questions they're asking us to consider, and they would be eager to discuss this with any Canadian or international officials on this matter. So I will present it to committee and we can have it properly translated so everyone has a copy.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Angus. Just would like to ask Mr. Collins to stay on the line, just to go into camera with us just for a few minutes. You had mentioned you wanted to say a few things there. I just wanted to thank you publicly, though, for appearing before us. I think it's deeply troubling. One that's foremost to me is allowing foreign money to influence our elections and the viewers not knowingly being a part of that. I think is deeply concerning, and enabling those bad actors to influence our democracy is troubling to us all here at our committee. So I just want to suspend for about 5 minutes until we clear the room. So just stay on the line, Mr. Collins.
Thank you.
Thank you.